to this. There we go. Okay. Okay, there we go. Thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. So, my name is Mia. I know lots of you know me, and there's some new faces and old faces here, and we'll just let people kind of trickle in as they come. But we're going to set aside probably about 60 minutes tonight. We'll see how far we kind of get with things and what the questions will look like at the end here. So, maybe just hold any questions just towards the end, if you guys don't mind, because sometimes it just pops up in the chat and then I end up getting a little bit distracted. But so tonight is all about mastering your metabolism. So we're going to be deep diving into quite a few different things. So some of the main things we're going to be talking about tonight are some of the contributing factors to weight, including the hormone impact. We'll talk a little bit about medications, digestive health, inflammation. We'll talk about nutritional foundations for not only just weight loss, but how to have better hormones, better energy, better mood, all of those good things. We're going to be diving into some of the most common diets that we see, especially for weight loss, things like the keto diet, intermittent fasting. We'll touch on those things a little bit there, what the best diet is for weight loss, and then we'll also kind of touch on the emotional and spiritual connection to weight. So just a little bit about me before we dive in. Again, a lot of you know me and some of you are kind of maybe new to my world, but my name is Mia Harris. I am a holistic nutritionist. I've been doing this for almost 9 years now. So I started back, I think in my mid-20s there, and I've done a number of different things. I've worked at naturopathic clinics. I've worked with other coaches on programs. I've developed apps, done meal planning, lots of different things. And right now, I currently have my own online practice, which is one-on-one coaching with a focus on women's hormone, gut health, and weight loss. I'm also a clinic instructor at Pacific Rim College. It's located in Victoria, BC. I teach online. I teach some clinics and classes on business and emotional and disordered eating. So one of the reasons that I got into nutrition was I struggled a lot in my mid-20s with I was holding on to some weight. My hormones were a mess after coming off birth control. And I really, really struggled with my relationship with food and my body. So I decided to study nutrition, and I kind of wanted to put a blueprint together for women to kind of how to nourish themselves properly and support all the things that we're going to talk about today. So kind of my approach to health and to weight loss is that it should be enjoyable, maintainable, and sustainable. If we can't see ourselves, if we're wanting to make changes in our diet and we can't see ourselves doing it for the next 3 years, 5 years, I say don't bother doing it. The quick fixes and the all or nothing approach never ever sticks. So enjoyable, maintainable, and sustainable. I don't believe in cutting out whole food groups or never having any fun. I think it's important and part of a healthy diet to have some fun things and have a glass of wine on Friday if that's what you like, or an ice cream cone with your kids in the summertime, or your grandma's cookies at Christmas. So important to have some flexibility in there. So I don't feel like our diet should feel really hard and that we should feel hungry all the time or thinking about food all the time. That just makes things a lot harder. We shouldn't feel like we have to use exercise, especially to burn off or earn the food that So when it comes to overall kind of metabolic health, there's lots of different things that impact our metabolism and how we kind of hold on to weight, distribute weight, how will we utilize our food and utilize food that we use for energy, especially. So many different factors. So one of the big ones is hormones. So we're going to delve into this piece a little bit more as we kind of go along here, but we have many, many different hormones in our bodies. So it's the ones specifically that kind of contribute to our metabolic health and how we hold on to weight, both high and low estrogen. So sometimes I see high estrogen in women who maybe are coming off of the birth control pill. So sometimes that will show up with irregular cycles, lots of breast tenderness, holding on to water, cramping, those sorts of things. And then low estrogen as well. So I see this very, very commonly with women that I work with who are in their perimenopausal and menopausal years. So our estrogen levels are starting to decline as we get older. Fat cells actually are a source of estrogen. So it's very natural for the body to want to hold on to that as a source of estrogen. So both high and low estrogen, and then low testosterone. So testosterone is very, very important for maintaining muscle mass. So sometimes I will see that commonly again as we start to get older, we get lower levels of testosterone. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go. Hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, insulin resistance. So we'll delve into the hormone piece a little bit further as we go here. Sleep has a big impact on our metabolism. So if we are not getting a good night's oh, I think I just have to mute someone here. Hold on. There we go. Okay. So if we're not getting a good night's sleep, so if we're getting less than 6 hours every night, we're not getting into that deep restful sleep, that will actually skyrocket our stress hormones. It will throw off our hunger hormones. So sometimes you might feel like you get not so good of a sleep, and then you just feel like we want to eat the next day. Impacts our blood sugar, increases cravings for sugar and sweets and salts. So very, very important to focus on sleep. Stress levels, we'll talk about kind of the cortisol connection again further along as we go. Nutrient deficiencies, if we're not getting enough nutrients from our food, our brain kind of tells us that we're still hungry and we still need to go out and look for food. So really important to have a whole food, nutrient-rich diet. Gut issues, our gut is what breaks down our food and helps us assimilate our food. So if we have any issues there, that can impact our metabolism. Inflammation, certain medications, which we'll dive into. Blood sugar issues. Blood sugar is probably one of the biggest things to focus on if you are looking to have better hormone health, a better metabolism, to reach a balanced weight, better mood, better energy. We need to focus on blood sugar balance. Calories do play a part when it comes to weight loss, but I think there's a bit too much of an emphasis on calories. And again, we'll talk about that more as we go here, and also the emotional connection to food. So there's a lot of kind of things that we need to be thinking and looking at it as more of a holistic perspective, not just, eating less and exercising more. There's a little bit more to the puzzle. So why dieting doesn't work, if any of you are following me on social media, you kind of know I'm not, ditching diets is one of the best things that I ever did, because it just ends up making us feeling like a little bit stuck. So what happens is it's too restrictive, and then we can't maintain it, and then we just end up giving up and going back to our normal eating habits. So oftentimes too, especially if we are maybe drastically cutting our calories, so if we are slashing our calories down too low, what happens is the body gets very, very smart, and our metabolism actually adjusts. So it figures, okay, we used to be getting this amount of calories, now we're only getting this amount of calories. We need to kind of hold off on, burning through our resources. So we're going to slow things down a little bit. And also other things might get impacted. We're not going to maintain muscle mass as well. Maybe our hair and our skin, our nails kind of get impacted because we just don't have the energy to support those things. Same with things like around our hormones and our cycle too. So, yeah. And then what happens on the flip side of it too, so now our metabolism has decreased, and then the body naturally will skyrocket your hunger hormones. You'll feel starving all the time, thinking about food all the time, and then we can't maintain it. So we go back to normal eating, put on the weight back and more, and then we just end up in this constant cycle over and over and over again. Other things, increases your cortisol levels. So especially if, we're using that same method of eat less, exercise more, and we're doing it to excess, it will increase our stress hormones, and that leads to a whole other slew of other issues with our hormonal health. And it also doesn't look at that emotional connection to food too, right? Like we can have the perfect diet and the perfect meal plan, but, humans have an emotional connection to food, and sometimes rely on that as a source of dopamine or to lower our stress levels too. So it's not as easy as it seems sometimes too. So I always say that willpower is not a real thing. So sometimes we think, what's wrong with us? We're following this diet, we can't follow it. What's wrong with us? And then we give up. It's not you. It's diet. So okay, so we kind of touched on this already, but just the calories in, calories out. So many people, if you look online and you Google weight loss, being in a calorie deficit definitely is part of the equation, but we don't have to be drastically cutting our calories in order to lose weight. Sustainable 200 to 300 calories a day is kind of the sustainable rate for weight loss. And also, it's not just all about calories, because many different foods are metabolized very different. So you could take 100 calories of broccoli, 100 calories of chicken, 100 calories of gummy bears, and they're all broken down and utilized and metabolized very, very different. So can't just only look at it from calorie perspective. Doing that will keep us, again, very, very, very stuck. It looks at that small piece of that puzzle. Okay, so just touching a little bit more onto the hormonal imbalances that contribute to weight. One of the biggest ones that I see is insulin resistance. So, insulin is basically a hormone that is produced by the pancreas whenever we eat food, and its job is to team up with glucose. So, when food is broken down, specifically carbohydrates, it turns into glucose, and that's what we utilize as energy in our cells. So, insulin pairs up with a glucose molecule and it comes up to our cells, it knocks on the door, and it says, "Hey, cell, I have some energy here for you. Can I let it in?" Acts like a key and lets that glucose into that cell to be utilized as energy. But when we have insulin resistance, that insulin is hanging out outside that cell, knocking on the door, and the cell is not letting it in. It goes, nope, nope, we're not letting you in for a number of different reasons. We won't delve into the reasons behind insulin resistance happens, but this is very, very common in women that I see with cases like polycystic ovarian syndrome. Around 80% of women with PCOS have insulin resistance. Women, as we get older, we also tend to get a little bit more insulin resistant as we age too. So that just means that we're not utilizing glucose, and we have to get a little bit smarter about specifically the carbohydrates that we're eating, amongst other things that we'll get into as well. Type 2 diabetes, so a number of different things. So if you feel like you have insulin resistance, you can get your blood sugar levels tested. Usually they will test your insulin and glucose in the morning. Ideally, our blood sugar levels should be low overnight. And if we have sugar in our system, that's a good indicator that that there's some resistance going on, that glucose isn't being utilized. So if the cells aren't utilizing glucose as energy, then guess what ends up happening? We have this surge in blood sugar. We'll store a little bit in our liver, in our muscles, and then kind of whatever is left over gets stored as weight. So then typically people with insulin resistance will constantly feel hungry, might crave a lot of sugar, and it's just very, very difficult to lose weight, even if you're on a calorie deficit. We talked a little bit about high and low estrogen levels. So again, I see this ladies in the menopausal years with declining levels of estrogen, low testosterone needed for maintaining muscle mass, thyroid imbalances. So thyroid's our little gland that kind of sits in our neck. If we have low thyroid function, so things like hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, then we'll have a hard time with our metabolism, and sometimes that can lead to weight gain, lots of fatigue, sometimes hair loss for women. Leptin resistance is another one. So leptin is a hormone that helps to regulate our appetite. So sometimes I see this combined with insulin. So sometimes people can eat and they just never quite feel satisfied after they've had a meal. Sometimes there's some issues with our hunger and satiety hormones. And then high cortisol. So we are going to actually get into that on the next slide, because I know 2024 was kind of the year of cortisol. Everybody was talking about cortisol levels, how to regulate it, and that regulating our cortisol levels was the key to making our life better. But there's a lot of misinformation around cortisol. Cortisol is very, very essential. It what wakes us up in the morning, gets us motivated and excited. The problem comes is when it's in excess and it's constantly being elevated. So high cortisol, basically what it does when our body senses that there's some stress in the environment, it wants us to have energy to either run or fight whatever is stressing us out. So it'll actually release stored sugar in our liver to bring up our blood sugar so that we have energy to fight or run away from something. But a lot of the times we're not doing that. We're sitting at our desk, maybe stressing out over a deadline that we have. So we're not actually burning off that excess glucose and excess sugar in our system. So again, it gets stored as weight, and then we end up on a blood sugar roller coaster. We're hungry, we're craving sugar. Sometimes if we're an emotional eater, then we might rely on those kind of more carbohydrate rich foods in order to kind of manage our emotions too. So stress is not only just, deadlines at work or things going on with the kids or your fridge broke down. Stress can be from a number of different things. One is going to be from blood sugar imbalances. So we'll delve into the blood sugar in more detail, but if our blood sugar is constantly spiking and dropping throughout the day, so maybe we're going too long without meals, or maybe we're having meals that are kind of too high in sugar or carbohydrates, not balancing them out with protein and fiber, then we kind of end up on this blood sugar roller coaster. That can be quite stressful. If blood sugar drops, that triggers a cortisol release. If we're exercising too much, so if we're kind of, maybe doing long amounts of cardio or doing tons of high intensity interval training, that raises our stress hormones. Inflammation, excess caffeine, alcohol, chronic cannabis use, and then not eating enough is also very stressful on the body. So very, very important for the basis of hormone health and for a balanced weight is to look at regulating our cortisol levels. So kind of the key foundations that I work with people on, whether it is managing their weight or looking at a hormone, looking at managing their hormones. So that can be anything from some of the conditions we talked about, polycystic ovarian syndrome, fibroids, struggling with issues in menopausal years, things around the cycle. It always comes back to these three foundations. So number one is blood sugar. The amount of times I talk about blood sugar in a day, I said I should start keeping a jar beside me because it truly, truly is just life-changing when we can learn to balance our blood sugar levels. Gut and liver health is also very important. So a lot of our hormones are metabolized in the gut and liver. So things like our thyroid hormones, estrogen, there's a whole collection of bacteria called the estrobolome in the gut that helps to metabolize estrogen. So if things are out in the gut, it has a ripple effect on our hormone health, on metabolism. So really important to look after those guys. And then again, stress and managing cortisol. Kind of what happens from a hormone standpoint, if our body is too busy producing cortisol, it sees it kind of as the most important thing is to get us out of that stressful situation. So the body will prioritize making cortisol. So it will kind of put our thyroid hormones on the back burner. It'll put our sex hormones on the back burner. So if there's any issues with low progesterone or low estrogen or low testosterone, low thyroid function, we always come back to supporting our adrenals, which are the two glands that produce cortisol, and just kind of really looking at regulating our cortisol levels and getting enough sleep, balancing blood sugar, setting boundaries. There's a lot kind of to that. Okay, there are some medications that impact weight. So things like SSRIs, antidepressant, anti-anxiety medications. Sometimes that has an influence on our insulin levels and again how we metabolize glucose. Sometimes it can impact our hunger hormones as well. Birth control pills, so that can increase estrogen. Steroid uses, again, impact on blood sugar, insulin. A lot of this has to do with blood sugar, so we probably see a little bit of a theme here. Diabetes medication, so specifically use of insulin in type 1 diabetes. Beta blockers for hypertension, usually kind of around that is sometimes it makes people feel a little bit tired, so they're not as motivated to maybe go out for a walk or exercise or do the meal prep or cook or do those sorts of things. Nutrient deficiencies. So if we have low nutrient levels in the appetite center of the brain, the brain will kind of trigger a ravenous appetite and uncontrollable cravings. So the brain thinks, hey, that's great, we're getting lots of calories in. So that's kind of a problem that we see, I would say, in North America. Many people struggle with their weight and we're getting enough calories in many senses, but we're actually not getting enough nutrients. So we need to really be looking at eating more whole foods, cooking more from home, eating lots of colorful foods too, color and foods that kind of have lots of color in them are very high in nutrients too. So very important to get lots of nutrients from our diet. Low vitamin D levels. So vitamin D actually acts kind of similar to a hormone in the body and it helps to regulate our insulin levels. I see low vitamin D levels in a lot of, again, hormonal imbalances, especially things like PCOS, endometriosis. So if you are living in North America, places like I am in Saskatchewan right now, it's very dark. Don't get a lot of sun on my skin. We need to be taking vitamin D. I like vitamin D in a liquid form combined with vitamin K. It's actually best absorbed when you take it in combination with vitamin K and magnesium as well. So up to around 4,000 IUs a day for adults is quite safe. So yeah, if you're somebody, you should be taking vitamin D, especially if you're feeling tired or have any issues around your hormone health. You can check your vitamin D levels. A lot of times doctors don't want to check it, but take some vitamin D. Magnesium is another one. Magnesium is a mineral that is used for hundreds of different functions in the body. One of them is our metabolism. Many people are low in magnesium because of how food is grown. Usually magnesium comes from our soil. And food absorbs that through our soil. But a lot of soil that we're using is there's no magnesium in it. So I find magnesium, almost everybody can benefit. What I like is magnesium bisglycinate. That is my favorite one. B vitamins, again, also very important for regulating the metabolism as well. Iodine and selenium deficiencies. So those are two important nutrients for thyroid health. So eating things like seaweeds and seafoods, salmon, fish, and then selenium. Brazil nuts are actually the best source of selenium. So 2 Brazil nuts per day for thyroid health can be really beneficial. So supplements, so kind of touched on these too. So vitamin D combined with K. So I like liquid vitamin D best. I find that's best absorbed. Magnesium bisglycinate, there's a number of different forms of magnesium, but magnesium bisglycinate is the most easily absorbed and utilized. There's a few other ones like citrate. I more so use those with clients that are maybe struggling with constipation. Threonate can be good for crossing the blood-brain barrier, helpful for cognitive function, but magnesium bisglycinate is a pretty well-rounded one. Again, utilized for so many things. Very, very good for nervous system support. So if you find, especially if you have trouble sleeping or winding down in the evening, magnesium can be a great one. Or if you just have higher levels of stress, the body burns through lots of nutrients when we have higher levels of cortisol, magnesium being one of them. So a great supplement to add into your routine. I think vitamin D and magnesium, those probably are two of the most important ones. And if you just took those two alone, you'd probably see a big difference. Inositol is another one that I use mostly with women that have polycystic ovarian syndrome and insulin resistance, and I have used it with my ladies in menopausal years. Great for regulating blood sugar, helping to manage insulin resistance, but it can also be very helpful for sleep because I know sleep can be a big issue and kind of go into perimenopause, menopausal years. Sometimes that's because of declining progesterone, sometimes it's blood sugar issues, sometimes it's cortisol issues, but inositol is a nice supplement to help with that. Berberine is kind of like natural GLP-1. So I know Ozempic's kind of going crazy, but berberine is kind of a natural supplement that kind of mimics the same impacts that those medications have. So it's a herb. What it does is slows down how fast your stomach is emptying. So it helps to regulate blood sugar a lot better. Just want to be careful with that one. We don't want to be taking it long term. It does impact the gut microbiome. So just be mindful of that. Glutamine, and it's an amino acid that is really great for sugar cravings. That's one of my favorites. It's also really good for gut health. Chromium is great for regulating blood sugar, and then whey protein powder. So I'm kind of a big fan of incorporating some protein powders into my routine. I feel like it's just a really easy way just to kind of bump up our protein, easy to just make a shake during the day. It's kind of one meal I know that I'm going to have a good amount of protein. I can add lots of nutrients to it, but whey protein is also very beneficial for maintaining muscle mass. So especially if you are on a calorie deficit, it helps to maintain our muscle mass. Really great for regulating appetite as well, and for blood sugar support too. Okay, so just delving a little bit into gut health, inflammation, and weight. So the gut plays a major role in digestion, fat storage, and our hunger levels. In holistic nutrition, we call the gut the mother of the body because when she is unhappy, everything else is unhappy. It'll impact hormonal health, as we talked about. It'll impact our metabolism. It can impact our mental, emotional health, lots of different things. So it can be compromised due to many things. So stress is a big one. If we have a poor diet, if we've been on multiple rounds of antibiotics, certain medications can impact the gut, food allergies, too much coffee, too much alcohol. So if we're not able to digest and absorb our nutrients from our body, so that kind of goes back to the nutrient deficiencies. So if things are kind of out with digestion, we're not breaking down and assimilating nutrients properly, then the brain kind of still thinks that we're starving and our hunger hormones are going to be ramped up. So need to be looking at optimizing digestion. So there's also specific hormones produced in the gut. So similar, so again, those GLP-1 semaglutides that are used in those products like Ozempic, those hormones are in the digestive tract. So yeah, really important to look after the gut, making sure we have lots of good bacteria going on there. We have enough acidity in our stomach to break down our food. We're having regular bowel movements. So lots to kind of unpack around digestion there. But and also inflammation. So if we have a lot of inflammation going on in the body or in the gut too, that will actually increase our stress hormones and then kind of have that ripple effect again on our metabolism too. So what's the formula for a balanced weight? This is not just for weight. This is for hormones, for better energy, better mood, kind of, again, all around kind of holistic approach to health. Not just solely focused on weight loss, but blood sugar balance. So we'll get into that as we go. A well-rounded, nutrient-rich diet, a regulated nervous system, good quality sleep. Strength training, I think, is very important for women, especially as we get older and our muscle mass is naturally starting to decline. Muscle is kind of like metabolic powerhouse. It helps to sop up excess glucose in our system. So really important to maintain our muscle mass. Walking, I think walking is incredibly overrated for health. It lowers stress hormones, it balances blood sugar. So I was just reading recently that walking after a meal can actually lower our blood sugar levels by about 30%, which is that's pretty significant. And so daily walks, like we can get out for a walk every single day. I think that just makes a huge difference. Stress management, self-care, addressing our emotions without food. So if you do find you're somebody who, has a long, stressful day and you kind of lean on some of those more fun foods and more higher palatable foods, chips and popcorn and candies and sweets and ice creams and those things, then, just kind of addressing that. I'll talk about that a bit more too. And then just addressing our gut health and supporting happy hormones at the same time. Okay, so blood sugar balance. So I know I kind of touched on this too. So this is something that I probably work with clients on the most, even the first month that we're working together. It's just learning how to support our blood sugar levels. So ideally, I'm just going to move to this next one here. So this is kind of what I call the blood sugar roller coaster, which is what we want to avoid. So high blood sugar, so that, to give you some examples, would be let's say maybe we have a sugary Starbucks drink in the morning, or maybe a blueberry muffin that we got from the coffee shop, or a piece of toast with jam, or maybe a bowl of oats with banana and brown sugar on it. The thing with these foods is that they're mostly carbohydrates. There's not a lot of fiber in there. There's not a lot of protein, a lot of fats in there. And what happens when we eat carbohydrates on their own, they tend to digest quite quickly. So then we get a surge in blood sugar, and that would be great if you are going for a workout, you're going to go for a run. It's okay to spike your blood sugar because you're going to be utilizing that glucose quite quickly. But for most of us, we're getting ready in the morning and then we're going to sit at our desk. And we don't need access to all that glucose. So we have too much sugar in our system. The body utilizes what it can for energy. It'll store some in our liver and our muscles for backup. And then whatever gets left over, the body will store for later in our fat stores. So then what happens is, a couple hours later, our blood sugar levels will drop. So you might feel hungry quite quickly after you've eaten. You might feel a little bit shaky or irritable, tired, get some brain fog, start to crave sugar. That's typically what happens in that kind of afternoon 3 p.m. slump when our energy starts to dip and we're craving chocolate and sugar and caffeine. It's because our blood sugar levels have dropped. So ideally, what we want to kind of do is keep it to this green line here. So that means making sure that we have a good balance of protein, fat, fiber, and carbohydrates. So I'm not trying to demonize carbohydrates by any means. Really important, especially for women, to have some carbohydrates in our diet. It's just about choosing kind of the right ones that have some fiber in it and pairing it with protein and fiber. When we have meals that have protein, fat, and fiber in them, it slows down how fast we're digesting our food. So then we just kind of get small amounts of energy. So we digest a little bit of food, our body can utilize that energy. We digest a little bit more, we can utilize that energy, and then things stay a lot more stable that way. So kind of how I like to teach is kind of the balanced plate method. So ideally, when you're looking at building out your meals, you kind of want to think about a few main things. So I always say protein is going to be or should be kind of the star of the show. So protein is going to be any of your animal proteins, things like cottage cheese, Greek yogurt, eggs are great. Beans and legumes have some protein in there as well. So ideally, we want around 20 to 40 grams of protein at our meals. Half a plate of non-starchy veggies. So that's going to be anything that's like green, leafy greens, kale, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, zucchini, asparagus, those sorts of vegetables. There's not a lot of carbohydrates in them, but they're very high in fiber, they're very high in nutrients, very satiating. And then I would say for women, depending on what your goals are, your activity levels, around a third to a half a cup of starches. So that's going to be your carbohydrates. So rolled oats, sprouted whole grain breads, rice, sweet potatoes, beans and legumes do have some carbohydrates in there as well. So these all have fiber in them. So they're not going to have those big glucose spikes compared to things like white bread or pastries, things that have a lot of sugar in them. Okay to have those sometimes, but I'd say ideally if we can aim to eat like this around 80% of the time and then have some flexibility is kind of what we want to aim for. Then having some good fats in there. So olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil is fine. Any nuts and seeds, hemp hearts, chia seeds, ground flax seeds are all great things to have. I actually have a how to balance your blood sugar freebie that I have it on my website. I can include this if you kind of want a bit of a refresher and you're like, wait, I don't know what's good sources of fiber or what good sources of fats are, then I'll include that when I send that out here too. So and then the bonus is adding some acidity. So when you add either lemon juice or some vinegar on your meal, so that further delays how fast we're digesting our food as well. It's a little bit of a hack. I've also seen you can actually do apple cider vinegar in a small amount of water and drink that after higher sugar meals, and it helps to regulate blood sugar too. So, okay. And then just delving into protein a little bit. So again, protein and cortisol were the words of 2024, but protein for good reason. So again, very, very satiating. So most of the time, if you don't normally hear people say, like, I ate way too much chicken breast, because it's very, very satisfying. So it's hard to overdo it with protein because it actually turns off our hunger hormones in our brain. There's a bit of a theory that the body kind of will look for a certain amount of protein per meal per day. And if you don't meet that, it'll actually tell you to go out and look for more food. So if you find like you're somebody you're hungry all the time, thinking about food all the time, you're probably going to want to up your protein intake. So I find for most women, this is going to be very dependent on, again, what your goals are and what you're looking to achieve, but minimum 80 grams of protein for women. I find many, many women under eating on protein, maybe getting around 50 to 60, which just isn't quite enough. Especially if you're wanting to put on more muscle mass, or maybe you're training a lot in the gym. Really, you want to look at increasing your protein. It's actually recommended to have 1 gram of protein per ideal body weight per day. So just to give you an example, let's say, just throwing some numbers out here, you're 175 pounds, you're wanting to weigh 150 pounds, then you would eat 150 grams of protein per day, which seems like a lot. What I commonly get from my clients is like, are you sure? It seems like I'm eating a whole lot more. And I'm like, yes, because it probably will feel like that, but you're kind of just shifting where kind of your calories are coming from. And it's almost like eating more in order to eat less. When you eat more protein and more fiber, regulates your hunger hormones, your sugar cravings. So just kind of helps you to stick to things a little bit better and avoid some of those higher sugar, higher fat, carby kind of stuff. Yeah, so proteins basically, our body doesn't overly love to use protein as a source of energy. It likes to utilize protein for building and repairing our muscles and our bones, hormone production, producing digestive enzymes, and again, very, very satiating by slowing down how fast the stomach is empty. So sources of protein, just to give you some kind of rough examples of maybe what does kind of 20, 30 grams of protein look like. So about 3 eggs is about 18 grams of protein. About 3/4 of a cup of Greek yogurt or cheese is around 20 grams. around 4 ounces. I kind of see that as about being the size of your palm when you're looking at animal proteins as a serving size. Depending on if it's fish or steak or salmon, it's going to yield you anywhere between just over 20 to 31 grams of protein. Tofu and tempeh are going to be the highest plant-based sources of protein. Again, beans and legumes will have a little bit, but they also have a good amount of carbohydrates in them. So I almost more so see those as a carbohydrate source than I do protein. Protein also at breakfast is going to be a big game changer. I see so many people skipping out on breakfast and then they're feeling hungry and tired later on in the day. If you're somebody that binge eats in the evening or has lots of sugar cravings in the evening, I want you to look at what you're having for breakfast. You have a good breakfast with a good amount of protein, it just starts the day off. It helps to regulate blood sugar, it regulates your cortisol levels, regulates your hunger hormones. So if there's any big takeaway, I would say start your day with a good amount of protein, and it is life-changing. Okay, we'll just touch a little bit on exercise. So ideally with exercise, we don't want too much or too little. So I sometimes, I'm just going to go back here. I just had to something there. Okay. Ideally, we don't want too much or too little. So I sometimes find when people are looking to lose weight, we end up way overdoing it on the exercise, doing tons of cardio, doing only those kind of HIIT boot camp style workouts. And sometimes those can kind of raise our cortisol levels. So if we are struggling with high stress levels, then that can kind of exasperate it. So just okay. I find kind of a good routine. I'm again big fan of strength training 2 to 4 days per week, getting out for a walk every single day, adding in some yoga, mobility in there, and then just kind of getting in more movement. So parking farther away from the grocery store, taking the stairs, that all adds up. I think we kind of just end up sitting too much during the day. So I'm like, take exercise snacks, break it up throughout the day, and that can make a big difference. Okay, and just touching a little bit on the emotional connection. So a lot of foods, especially those that are higher in sugar and carbs and fat and salt, those all increase our dopamine levels in the brain. So it's very natural to gravitate towards those things. And that also just drives us to want to go out and look for food. It's kind of a survival mechanism. Eating also does lower stress as well. So again, very natural, but I do find what has been very interesting. Sometimes when I work with clients, they go, I'm an emotional eater. When I get home from work, I can't stop thinking about the ice cream or the chips in the cupboard or the candies. And I'm like, okay, and then they work on their blood sugar and they're eating more protein and more fiber and eating more in the bulk of the day when they actually need that energy. I find a lot of women are under eating, especially during the day. And then they get home from work and they're starving and ravenous. And so they tend to maybe overeat or binge eat or crave those sweets in the evening. When they look at regulating their blood sugar, then actually I'm not an emotional eater. It happened to be I wasn't eating a protein, wasn't eating enough, and kind of fixed it. So an interesting connection there, but 100% there are emotional eating. Sometimes people with binge eating, especially food will increase dopamine levels. There's a connection to ADHD there as well, which we won't dive into too much, but there's also a kind of a trauma connection. So sometimes, we might hold on to weight as a source of protection to kind of protect us from getting hurt. Maybe we want it to make us feel safe or just kind of feel like we want to hide a little bit too. So sometimes, again, looking at more of a holistic perspective, and it's not always about the food in many, many cases. Okay, so just debunking a few common diets that I see floating around and I get asked about every single day. Fasting is a big one. So intermittent fasting, the typical window that I see is, fasting for about 16 hours per day and having an 8-hour eating window. So usually that's skipping breakfast, starting your first meal around noon, and then kind of last meal around 7, 8 o'clock at night. I don't typically recommend fasting. There definitely are benefits to it, especially for people struggling with insulin resistance, but you'd actually want to tweak it a little bit. I don't really recommend it for women that are in their reproductive years, so it can be a stressor. So we're abstaining from food, our blood sugar levels are getting low, increases stress. What I also see people doing is chugging the coffee in order to suppress appetite, and then doing a workout in the morning, not eating, and then that just ends up a recipe for hormone havoc. So Typically don't recommend it for reproductive years, but again, it can be a helpful tool for insulin resistance. So if I do use it, sometimes I will use it with clients that are in their menopausal years, maybe struggling with some insulin resistance. Typically they have a good relationship with food. Sometimes it can be used as kind of I see sometimes with people with disordered eating use it as a tool kind of to make up for poor eating habits, but you have a good relationship with food. And then what I would actually recommend is to pull that eating window back. So you have a good breakfast in the morning, and then maybe pull that eating window back in the evening. So maybe you're stopping eating around 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and you allow for around 12 to 14 hours between your last meal of the day and the first meal of your day the next day. That allows insulin levels to come down overnight. And again, not recommended if anybody has any signs of disordered eating. So low carb and keto, I had somebody asking me about this today. So a keto diet typically is one that is very, very high in fat. So you're eating, lots of avocados and bacon, high fat cuts of meat and peanut butter and nuts and seeds and those sorts of things, a moderate amount of protein and very low carb. What this diet does is tell the body to rely on ketones as a source of energy instead of carbohydrates. I typically don't recommend this. Again, I kind of think of the long-term game. Not a ton of people can maintain this for the long term. Sometimes it can be used in short, again, to regulate insulin levels, but I don't typically recommend it because it just gives us that all or nothing mentality that we talked about. And I am a big believer that carbs are needed for hormone health, especially for women, for brain health, for mood, for energy. So it's not demonizing carbohydrates. It's just utilizing the good ones, having the complex carbohydrates, good quality carbs, and then again pairing it with some protein and good fats. Vegan diets. So big things that I see is lots of deficiency in iron. I see women, whether they're eating animal protein or not, probably 9 out of 10 women I see have an iron deficiency. So this is going to make you feel very, very tired. So sometimes with being plant-based, it can make that even tougher, low on iron, low on B vitamins, iodine, vitamin A, all really important nutrients for supporting our hormone health and our reproductive health. It also can be sometimes hard to get enough protein. Typically, you're eating a lot of beans and legumes, again, that also have a lot of carbohydrates, not sometimes the best for women, especially if they're struggling with things like insulin resistance. I believe that humans should have some good quality animal protein in their diet for optimal health. Okay, and then the other one too, oftentimes we see this in the fitness world, eating 6 small meals, eating smaller meals throughout the day helps to rev up the metabolism. I'm actually a bigger fan of having a bit bigger, more substantial meals. I find this helps people keep satiated for longer. It also helps to regulate insulin and blood sugar. So when you allow yourself a little bit of space around 3 to 4 hours between meals, that allows insulin levels to decrease between those meals rather than to be constantly stimulated. Sometimes that's what leads to issues like insulin resistance if we're constantly stimulating insulin. If we have meals that have enough protein, ideally we should probably be able to go at least 3 hours without feeling really, really hungry. But that being said, I do find having a bit of a bridge snack in between lunch and dinner can be helpful to kind of get over that afternoon hump and kind of go into dinner and feeling at a comfortable level of hunger. So you're not going into dinner feeling like, oh, I'm so starving and I just need to eat really, really quickly. And then we overeat and then we feel bloated and all those good things. So I find having a bridge snack. So ideally with snacks, you kind of want to have something that has a bit of protein in there, some carbs, some good fats in there, like we talked about. So hard-boiled eggs, hummus and veggies, or crackers and cheese are okay. Apple and peanut butter, some nice trail mix with maybe some dark chocolate if you crave sugar, are all kind of nice bridge snacks. Or sometimes in a pinch, a protein shake can be good too. Sometimes I even do that if I know I'm going to have a dinner that's maybe not super high in protein, or maybe I'm going to have, maybe a pasta or going out for dinner. Sometimes I'll have a protein shake before just to kind of bump it up and then make sure I don't go into my meal feeling super, super hungry, because I always know that backfires on me. So what is the best diet for metabolic health, for hormone health. Ideally, it's a diet that is primarily whole foods. So, things that come from the earth, but things that have natural ingredients. If you're buying products at the store, ingredients that you can read and kind of understand that don't have a ton of preservatives, additives in there. Ideally, cooking from home the majority of the time. Again, we can go out and have fun. That's all part of having a healthy diet and relationship to food, making sure our meals are nice and balanced with protein, fiber, and fats. Not every single meal has to be completely perfect by any means. Having some fun and having some flexibility in there. Again, just aiming for that kind of 80-20 rule, 80% of the time, eating well to fuel our bodies, to fuel our hormones, our digestive health, have good energy, good mental clarity, and then 20% kind of to have some wiggle room, to have some fun things sprinkled in. I'm not a big fan of, saving up for cheat days or cheat meals. I think you can kind of sprinkle some fun things throughout the week to keep yourself motivated and just to have fun. The Mediterranean diet was actually voted best diet for, I didn't look for what it was for beginning of this year, but 2024 and 2023 was voted best diet of the year. So Mediterranean diet is, lots of olive oil and fish and whole grains and beans and legumes and whole foods. So really, really good to incorporate some of those things, and especially for our hormone health too. So I always say, like, if you want to measure your progress, slow and steady wins the race. If you're looking at any program that promises you fast weight loss or puts you on a really low calorie diet, I just saw one the other day of someone sharing about rapid weight loss and only eating 1,000 calories per day. I want you to run the other way. Because again, never ever works. So ideally, we want to aim for about 1.5 to 2 pounds of weight loss per week. And just weighing in 1 to 2 times per week. I say don't have to get crazy and jump on the scale every single day. Don't stress if the weight goes up. There's many, many things that can impact the number on the scale, where you're at in your cycle, your carbohydrate intake. Carbs tend to hold on to water, bowel movements, lots of different things. Tracking. So sometimes I use tracking, like, looking at things like our calorie intake, our macro breakdown, protein, fats, and carbohydrates. Sometimes I use that as a tool with my clients. Usually we really work on balancing blood sugar first. And if maybe the ball's not rolling as quick as we want, then we can kind of look at, okay, well, where are we kind of standing? Are we overeating on our calories? Are we maybe not eating enough protein? Are we overdoing it on the carbs? Where do we kind of stand? And also can be used as a learning tool too. So if you're someone's like, I have no idea, like, what a good source of carbohydrates is, or I don't know a lot about protein, sometimes just tracking and kind of looking at the things that we're eating can be a useful tool. Not for everybody. Sometimes it can be very overwhelming. And again, if there's any kind of disordered eating habits, then we want to avoid that, but it can be used as a learning tool. Okay, so we're almost up on the hour here. So I'm going to go through a bit of a case study. So I had a client coming to me. So she came to see me last summer. I see many, many clients, again, with polycystic ovarian syndrome who really have a hard time with their weight, lots of sugar cravings. She had some acne along her jawline, and she was feeling very, very bloated, especially after eating some fatty meals that had higher amounts of fat in them. Deep fried foods, those sorts of things. She said she kind of felt like she was 6 months pregnant after eating, which I hear actually quite often. She had worked with a naturopath in the past, and they worked on getting out gluten, dairy, soy, sugar, alcohol. And what happened was she lasted about 3 months, and then she's like, I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't go out with my friends. I was eating different meals with my family. She said it was just, I couldn't do it anymore. And then she kind of binged on all the things that she couldn't have over the last 3 months. And then she was back at square one, and then kind of started to feel guilty if she did have any of these foods. So we did a number of things. First thing, as I mentioned, we worked on balancing blood sugar. So making sure our plate had enough protein and fiber to help reduce her cravings, manage her hunger, especially with insulin resistance. We focused on eating 3 bigger meals with 1 to 2 snacks. So especially snack in the afternoon. And then we increased her protein intake. Her last meal, we did a touch lower in carbohydrates. We also did a customized gut healing protocol. So we ended up doing a functional test. I'll kind of show you what came up on her test here, but really worked on increasing the good bacteria in her gut, getting some good probiotics in there, optimizing digestive function. And then we worked on regulating her stress hormones. So the blood sugar piece, walking outside, getting to sleep, having a bit of a down routine at night, getting off screens, reading a book instead, those sorts of things. We did a functional test with her. So this is called a GI map. I use this test in my practice, along with another one. It's called the Dutch. It's a hormone panel, but this one is kind of more so if someone's struggling with digestive issues. So it's a really, really cool test that kind of tells you an overview of what's going on in the digestive tract. So what we found for her was she had a number of levels of bacteria that were quite high. So we call those opportunistic bacteria, bad bugs in the gut. So that can lead to a lot of indigestion, a lot of gas, a lot of bloating. She had very, very low levels of beneficial bacteria in her gut. So we really worked at building those back up, getting a probiotic in there, probiotic rich foods, making sure we're feeding those probiotics too with prebiotics. So that comes from a lot of fruits and vegetables that we eat. And then she had a couple of markers of her pancreatic enzymes were low, which was causing her issues. She wasn't actually breaking down fat and absorbing it properly. So that was causing a lot of those issues when she was eating meals that were a bit higher in fat. So got her on a bit of a good protocol there. We looked at getting rid of that bacteria, increasing the good one, and then just optimizing overall digestive function. So after we worked together for 3 months, so she was down about 25 pounds. So this was right on track. We were aiming for 2 pounds per week, and that's what she did. Her sugar cravings drastically reduced. Her bloating had subsided quite a bit. And then she had more energy. One of her biggest goals was that she just wanted to be able to keep up with her kids and go on hikes and bike rides and go for long walks with them on the weekends and just have energy to kind of run around with them in the yard. And then also not so fearful of food. So again, didn't have a very good relationship with food, had that all or nothing approach, felt very, very guilty after eating certain foods. So we learned to kind of how to incorporate some of her favorite things and still kind of keep on track, still support our blood sugar and our weight loss goals, but have a little bit of flexibility in there too. Okay, so just lastly, so just to wrap up, if you have gone through this and you're like, oh, you know what, I need some support on there, or I'm not sure about that, maybe need some support with my digestive health or my hormones, or looking to drop some pounds, I do have a program coming up. It's actually on January 21st, so I guess that's a little over a week and a half there. So this is a 3-month program. So it's going to be a combination of one-on-one coaching. We're also going to be doing weekly group sessions, kind of diving into some of these topics a little bit further, the blood sugar, the hormone piece, digestion, all those fun things, do some Q&A sessions. I'm hoping to have some guests come in. You also do get access to a functional test, so a GI map. So if you're someone struggling with a lot of heartburn, a lot of bloating, constipation, loose stools, those sorts of things, then we can kind of take a look under the hood to see what's going on, so to speak, or a Dutch complete test. So a Dutch complete test is a hormone panel. So it's a very comprehensive overview of what your hormones are doing. And it'll look at estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. It looks at what your cortisol levels are doing throughout the day, melatonin levels. There's lots of really good stuff in there. So if you're someone that's like, you know what, yes, I'm struggling with my metabolic health, but also there's some hormone stuff going on, you feel like that's maybe preventing you from reaching your goals, and that's a really good one to check too. Lots of meal plans and recipe guides. So yeah, that's coming up next week. So it's kind of a deeper dive into all the topics that we talked about today and combining that with some one-on-one support. So, okay. So that's it for my presentation. So I thought I'd maybe open up. I don't know if anybody has any questions or not, if you want to pop on, or you can pop it in the chat if you like. Well, if you do think of one, so again, so this is recorded. I'll send the recording out tomorrow along with the show notes, and I'll also link that blood sugar guide that I have as well. And if any questions come up or something came up afterwards, just feel free to shoot me over an email, and I'm more than happy to help there. So yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me tonight, and I hope everyone had a good holiday and a happy new year, and I hope this was helpful. I hope this kind of brought some things to light, or maybe have a few things that you might be able to implement. It can be a lot, so just take it slow and pick one thing to focus on and go from there. So thank you again for coming. Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Okay, guys, thanks very much. Thanks, Jen. Bye, everyone.